The brisk autumn air of Washington, D.C. carried the sense of history and decay in equal measure. Amid the marble corridors of power and the neon glow of downtown streets, one story remained hidden, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and neglect. For many, the sacrifices of the past were honored in speeches and monuments. For others, they were forgotten. This is the story of Sarah Langley, a former U.S. Army veteran whose bravery on the battlefield was eclipsed by a shocking act of erasure, an act that left her and countless others like her invisible to the very country they had sworn to protect. Sarah Langley was not born to fade into obscurity. Raised on a sprawling Texas ranch by a family with deep military roots, she grew up listening to tales of honor, sacrifice, and duty. Her father, a battle-hardened Vietnam veteran, filled her evenings with stories of courage in the face of unimaginable adversity. Inspired by these accounts, Sarah longed to serve her country and prove her worth. When she turned 18, she enlisted in the United States Army with a fierce determination to embody the legacy of her forebears. During her 8 years of service, Sarah faced challenges that would break lesser souls. She was deployed to the harsh, unforgiving battlefields of the Middle East, where every day was a test of resolve. Amid the din of artillery fire and the constant threat of ambush, Sarah's leadership shone through. With sharp, determined eyes and her brown hair pulled back in a tight knot, she earned the respect of her peers and superiors alike. Her natural empathy drove her to risk everything for her comrades, even if it meant putting her own life on the line. One defining moment of her service came on a day that would forever alter the lives of those in her unit. In the heart of a dust-choked village in Kandahar, her unit was caught in a vicious ambush. Bullets flew in a hail of chaos as soldiers fell around her. In the midst of the chaos, Lieutenant David Miller, one of her closest comrades, was gravely injured. With adrenaline surging through her veins, Sarah defied the danger. Ignoring the searing pain and the screams that echoed in the smoky air, she sprinted toward the wounded officer. With every step, she risked her life further, yet nothing could stop her. She lifted Miller onto her back and carried him through the firing line, a single-minded act of heroism that would forever bind their fates. Later, as the dust settled, Miller's grateful words would echo in her heart. "You're not just a great soldier, Sarah. You're one of the bravest people I've ever known." For Sarah, duty was never about recognition or personal glory. It was about protecting the team, ensuring that every life mattered. Yet, after years of selfless service, when she finally returned home to the embrace of what she thought would be a grateful nation, she was met instead with silence, a silence so profound it threatened to swallow her whole. Sarah's homecoming was not the triumphant welcome she had imagined. Arriving in Washington, D.C. on a commercial flight from Kuwait, she carried nothing but a worn duffel bag and the faded uniform that had once filled her with pride. All she longed for was a chance at normalcy. A job, a modest apartment, a quiet life where she could finally rest. But as she stepped into the bustling corridors of the Department of Veterans Affairs, reality struck with a force more crushing than any enemy fire she'd ever faced. Sitting in a sterile waiting room, Sarah clutched her military ID and discharge paperwork, hoping they would serve as a key to unlocking the benefits she was owed. When her turn finally came, she approached the reception desk with a tentative hope. The tired clerk peered at her documents, his eyes growing confused as he typed her information into the system. After a few tense moments, he looked up, his face a mask of disinterest. "Are you sure there's no record of you in the system?" he asked. Sarah's heart pounded. With a mixture of disbelief and mounting horror, she replied, "I served for 8 years in the Army. Here's my discharge paperwork." But the clerk's answer was a blow that no veteran should ever endure. "I'm sorry, but according to our records, there is no record of a Sarah Langley ever serving in the U.S. Army." Time seemed to stand still. Sarah's mind raced as she forced out a laugh that came out brittle and hollow. "Maybe your system is down. Can I speak to a supervisor?" she asked, desperation creeping into her voice. The clerk simply shrugged, muttering about filing a formal appeal, a process that would likely lead nowhere. In that moment, Sarah felt as if her very existence was being questioned, erased from the annals of history. How could a woman who had risked her life for her country simply vanish from official records? Trembling, she left the building, her hands shaking as she clutched her phone. Desperation drove her to call former teammates, only to be met with hesitation or outright refusal. The cold realization set in. Someone was determined to bury her past. Returning to her small apartment, Sarah stared at her computer screen, entering her military ID number into the Department of Defense's website. The result was the same. No matching records found. It was as if 8 years of service had been wiped away by a single, unforgiving stroke of a keyboard. That night, as the glow of the monitor illuminated her tear-streaked face, Sarah made a vow. She would not let them win. If the system refused to acknowledge her sacrifice, then she would find the truth herself. Sarah's fight for her identity would not be a solitary one. Unbeknownst to her, in the depths of the bureaucratic machine, powerful forces were at work. Forces determined to keep her erased from history. But Sarah Langley was no stranger to adversity. The same fire that had driven her on the battlefield now surged within her as she began to piece together the fragments of her past. At first, she attempted to contact anyone who might corroborate her service. She reached out to former comrades, soldiers whose voices were now quiet and reluctant. In a series of disjointed phone calls, she heard mixed responses. Some offered sympathy, while others fell silent. One name, however, emerged repeatedly: James O'Connor, her former squad leader, a man whose own eyes betrayed a deep-seated fear whenever the subject of their last mission in Kandahar was mentioned. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah visited a small, familiar bar frequented by veterans. The dim lights, the clink of glasses, and the low murmur of conversations provided a backdrop for her search. In a far corner, she found James, a rugged figure marked by time and battle scars, nursing a glass of bourbon. His eyes, when they met hers, held both recognition and sorrow. "Sarah, I didn't expect to see you here," he murmured, his voice heavy with regret. "I need answers, James," she demanded. "I need to know why my records are gone. I fought for this country. Why have they erased me?" James hesitated before speaking. "You remember the mission in Kandahar, right? The one led by Colonel Harris? That mission, it went horribly wrong. So many of us lost our lives, and those who survived, who knew too much, were erased. Removed from the records to cover up the mistakes of those in charge." Sarah's blood ran cold as James's words confirmed her worst fears. "You're telling me they erased me to protect him? To cover up their failure?" James nodded grimly. "It wasn't just you, Sarah. Anyone who questioned or remembered too much was either made to vanish or forced into silence. Harris had powerful connections, and he wasn't about to let the truth see the light of day." The revelation ignited a fury in Sarah's heart. "I won't let them get away with this," she vowed, her voice firm despite the trembling of her hands. "I will reclaim my identity and expose the corruption that erased me." Determined to fight back, Sarah began gathering evidence. She scoured the few personal records she still possessed, photos, mission logs, letters from comrades, and documented every detail of her service. Every memory of the battlefield, every scar, became a piece of the puzzle that she would use to prove her worth. Her journey was no longer just about reclaiming her own identity. It was about standing up for all the forgotten veterans, the unsung heroes who had been cast aside by a system that no longer cared. Late at night, in the dim light of her small apartment, Sarah pored over files, cross-referring names and dates, determined to reconstruct the narrative that had been so ruthlessly expunged from history. Each click of her keyboard was a small act of defiance, a battle cry against the forces that sought to bury the truth. Her quest soon led her to unexpected allies. Among them was Ethan Carter, a former military intelligence specialist with a reputation for unearthing hidden secrets. Sarah tracked him down to a rundown cafe on the outskirts of the city, a dim, flickering neon sign proclaiming the establishment as a place for those who preferred to remain unseen. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of strong coffee and cigarette smoke. Ethan sat alone in a secluded booth, his face partly obscured by shadows. When Sarah approached, he looked up with a wry smile. "I'm surprised, Sarah Langley," he said, his tone teasing. "Took you long enough to find me." Sarah wasted no time. "Ethan, I need your help. My military records have been erased, completely wiped out. I need to know who's behind it." Ethan arched an eyebrow and took a slow sip of his coffee. "You think you can waltz in here and expect me to hand over answers on a silver platter?" he asked. "I know you, Ethan, and I know you love a challenge," she replied, her voice edged with determination. With a chuckle, Ethan pulled out his laptop. "All right then, let's see what we're dealing with." His fingers flew over the keys, diving deep into restricted databases that few had ever seen. The glow of the screen illuminated his intense, narrowed eyes as he navigated through layers of encrypted files. After several long minutes, he leaned back and his expression darkened. "This isn't normal," he muttered. "It's not just a clerical error, Sarah. Your name has been scrubbed from nearly every federal system. No financial records, no medical history, no social security data. It's as if you never existed." A cold chill swept over Sarah. "This isn't a mistake," she whispered, voice barely audible. "It was done deliberately. Who could have the clearance to do this?" Ethan hesitated, then lowered his voice. "I think you already know. Harris." At the mention of the name, Sarah's heart pounded fiercely. Harris? A high-ranking officer with deep connections and a vested interest in burying the truth behind the disastrous Kandahar mission. "Harris?" she repeated, her voice a mix of anger and disbelief. Ethan nodded solemnly. "He's the only one with that kind of pull, and if you keep pushing, you'll be making enemies in places you can't even see." But Sarah's resolve had crystallized. "I don't care how powerful he is," she declared. "He tried to erase me, but this time I'm coming for him." Ethan sighed, his face a mixture of admiration and concern. "Then you need proof, real, irrefutable proof, that Harris can't destroy or bury." Sarah's eyes blazed with determination. "The Kandahar mission. Somewhere, someone still has the original report before Harris covered it up." A small smile flickered on Ethan's lips. "You're sharp, Sarah. I believe there's a trail out there. Let's find it." As Sarah left the cafe, her mind raced with plans and strategies. Unbeknownst to her, shadowy figures in a black SUV were watching her every move. An ominous reminder that powerful forces would do everything in their power to silence her. The city's streets, once familiar and comforting, now held a menacing edge. Sarah's instincts told her that she was being followed. As she walked briskly to her car, a prickle of unease crawled up her spine. In the dim light of a nearly empty parking lot, she caught a glimpse of a black SUV parked near the exit, its tinted windows concealing all but a faint glimmer of movement inside. Sarah's hand gripped her keys tightly. In that moment, every lesson from her years in combat surged back. Vigilance, stealth, and the readiness to act at a moment's notice. She climbed into her car and started the engine, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror. The SUV's headlights flared to life, as if acknowledging her movement. Her pulse quickened. Sarah made a series of sharp turns, an abrupt right, then another left, weaving through back streets and alleyways with practiced precision. Finally, she spotted a narrow, dark alley and killed her headlights, blending into the shadows. She held her breath as the SUV cruised past without stopping, waiting a full minute before finally exhaling. Whoever was following her was no amateur, and Sarah was determined not to be caught off guard. She knew she needed to get to her next contact. Ethan had mentioned that the original Kandahar report might be in the hands of someone willing to risk everything to reveal the truth. With her mind set and adrenaline surging, Sarah navigated out of the city, heading toward a rundown cafe on a deserted highway, a known haunt for those who preferred to stay off the radar. The cafe was a relic of a bygone era. A small, dimly lit establishment with peeling wallpaper, a flickering neon sign, and an atmosphere heavy with secrets. Inside, Sarah found Ethan Carter waiting in a secluded booth, his eyes alert as he sipped a lukewarm coffee. "Unsurprised, Sarah Langley," Ethan smirked. "Took you long enough to find me?" Without preamble, Sarah slid into the seat across from him. "Ethan, my military records have been erased completely. I need to know who's behind it, and why." Ethan's expression grew serious. "I already told you, Sarah. Someone with clearance at the highest levels did this. Someone like Harris. Look, I've been digging around. Your name is missing from every federal database. It's as if you never existed." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "This isn't a clerical error, it's a deliberate act of erasure. Why would they do that?" Ethan hesitated, then leaned in. "Harris is covering up something, likely related to the disastrous Kandahar mission. Anyone who remembered too much, who questioned the official story, was either silenced or erased. And you, Sarah, are a loose end he can't afford." Anger and determination warred within her. "I don't care what it takes. I'm coming for him. I need proof." The original report from the Kandahar mission before Harris scrubbed it clean. Ethan's fingers flew over the keys as he bypassed standard databases, diving into restricted, encrypted files. The laptop screen glowed with lines of code and classified text. After several minutes, he looked up, his face grim. "Sarah, I found something. There's a shadow file referencing a detailed mission report from Kandahar. It was marked for destruction, but I believe someone might have saved a copy." Sarah's heart pounded. "Then we need to find it. I can't let them erase my history. Erase all of our histories." Ethan leaned back, his voice low and cautious. "Be careful, Sarah. Harris won't let you take him down without a fight. You're already making enemies." "I don't care," she replied. "I've already lost so much. I won't let him steal the rest of my identity." As she left the cafe, Sarah's determination burned like wildfire, even as she remained unaware that shadowy figures in the black SUV continued to track her every move. Every step forward was a step deeper into a war that she could neither avoid nor abandon. Over the next few days, Sarah's pursuit of the truth took her on a perilous journey across the city and into its forgotten corners. Late at night, she scoured abandoned warehouses and overlooked storage rooms where faded documents might still lurk. With every clue she unearthed about the Kandahar mission and every scrap of evidence linking it to Harris, her list of enemies grew longer. One chilly evening, as Sarah navigated a maze of back alleys near a derelict government building, she sensed she was not alone. A subtle movement in the periphery of her vision, a flash of black against the dark, confirmed her worst fear. Someone was following her again. With the honed instincts of a seasoned soldier, she accelerated, weaving through the labyrinthine streets. The black SUV was persistent, its headlights flaring as it trailed her at a distance. Heart pounding, Sarah took a series of sharp turns and eventually found refuge in a narrow alley behind a row of old warehouses. There, she killed her headlights and pressed herself against the cold brick wall, holding her breath as she watched the SUV pass by. After a tense minute, she exhaled slowly. "They're not amateurs," she whispered to herself. "But neither am I." Determined to press on, Sarah drove toward an abandoned industrial park where she believed an informant, someone who had once worked with the intelligence community, might have hidden a copy of the Kandahar report. Her instincts, honed in the crucible of combat, guided her through deserted roads and silent moonlit fields. Every bump in the road, every rustle in the wind, reminded her that she was not alone in this fight. At last, she arrived at a decrepit building marked only by faded graffiti and broken windows. Parking her car at a safe distance, she crept toward the entrance. Inside, in a darkened corner, she found a man with wary eyes and a heavy demeanor. He introduced himself simply as Mark, and though his words were few, his message was clear. He had once been part of an intelligence unit and had witnessed the cover-up firsthand. With trembling urgency, Sarah pressed him for details about the Kandahar mission report, about any evidence that could expose Harris's corruption. Mark's eyes darted around nervously. "They did everything to bury that report," he said in a hushed tone. "I was ordered to destroy all copies, but I managed to hide one." He slid a small flash drive across the dusty table. "This contains the unaltered mission report. It's your only chance to prove what really happened." Sarah's hands shook as she accepted the drive. "This is it," she whispered. "My history. My honor." "Depends on this." Before Mark could say more, footsteps echoed in the hallway. The sound of heavy boots and urgent voices confirmed her worst fears. Harris's men had found them. "Hide!" Mark hissed, pushing her into a cramped supply closet. Sarah's heart pounded as muffled voices approached. Through the slats of the door, she saw two figures. Men in uniform, their faces set in grim determination, searching for any sign of her presence. Time stretched painfully as she waited in the darkness. Every second felt like an eternity, her breathing shallow and rapid. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the voices receded and silence fell once more. Sarah emerged, clutching the flash drive tightly, knowing that this evidence was now her lifeline, and her most potent weapon against those who had stolen her identity. Armed with the incriminating report, Sarah prepared for the final confrontation. She knew that taking on Harris and his network would not be easy. She was up against a force with deep roots in power and influence. But the years of erasure and betrayal had forged in her a resolve that would not be broken. Late one evening, in a discreet safe house arranged by a trusted friend in the veteran community, Sarah reviewed the contents of the flash drive. Every word, every statistic, every detail of the Kandahar mission was laid bare before her eyes. The report painted a damning picture. It detailed the disastrous decisions that led to the ambush, the loss of lives, and the subsequent cover-up orchestrated by Colonel Harris and his cohorts. For Sarah, it was undeniable evidence of betrayal, a confirmation that her very existence had been erased to protect the interests of the powerful. Determined to expose the truth, she arranged to meet with a trusted journalist known for his fearless investigations into government corruption. In a quiet, unassuming diner in downtown D.C., she handed over a copy of the report along with her story. Over the next few days, the journalist worked tirelessly to verify the details. As the evidence piled up, word began to leak out, whispers of a scandal that could rock the military establishment and expose the cover-up of a lifetime. Then came the moment that would change everything. In a televised press conference held at the White House, President Donald Trump stepped forward, his face a mixture of resolve and controlled fury. "Today," he declared, "we honor the truth, and we will not allow the sacrifices of our brave service members to be erased." The crowd fell silent as he continued. "I have received a letter from a veteran whose name has been scrubbed from our records. A veteran who fought for our country and was betrayed by the very system meant to protect her. I promise you, we will find the truth." The announcement sent shockwaves through the nation. For the first time, the story of Sarah Langley was on center stage, a story of courage, betrayal, and a relentless fight for justice. The media descended upon the issue, and public opinion surged in support of veterans who had been forgotten. In the days that followed the press conference, a special task force was established to investigate the erasure of Sarah's records. Under intense public scrutiny, high-ranking officials were forced to acknowledge the systemic failures that had allowed her and countless other veterans to vanish from official memory. The investigation uncovered a web of corruption that reached far beyond a single commander. It implicated powerful figures who had manipulated records to shield themselves from accountability. Sarah, now a reluctant symbol of resistance, was called to testify before a congressional committee. In a packed hearing room under the harsh glare of studio lights, she recounted her experiences, the fierce battles in distant lands, the camaraderie of her unit, and the crushing heartbreak of returning to a country that claimed she had never existed. Her testimony was raw, unfiltered, and devastatingly honest. For many viewers, it was a revelation. The brave sacrifices of soldiers were not merely relics of a bygone era, but an ongoing struggle for dignity and justice. As the investigation progressed, evidence against Harris and his cohorts mounted. Under the pressure of mounting public outcry and the threat of legal action, several high-ranking officials resigned, and sweeping reforms were promised in the realm of veteran affairs. For Sarah, it was the beginning of reclaiming not just her identity, but the honor that had been stolen from her. In a solemn ceremony held on the steps of a newly renovated Veterans Memorial, Sarah Langley was formally recognized for her service. A restored military record was presented to her, a document that now acknowledged every sacrifice, every battle, every tear shed on foreign soil. With dignitaries and fellow veterans standing by her side, she accepted a restored Medal of Honor, a symbol not only of her bravery, but of a nation finally waking up to its obligations. President Trump, speaking from the podium, declared, "Today we stand together to honor not only one brave woman, but all those whose sacrifices have been hidden away. Let Sarah Langley's story be a clarion call to ensure that no veteran is ever forgotten again." The event was broadcast nationwide, and as Sarah's voice trembled with emotion while she recounted her journey, the nation listened. In that moment, the scars of betrayal began to heal, replaced by a collective promise of accountability and respect. In the aftermath of these events, sweeping reforms took hold. A comprehensive overhaul of military records was initiated, with new systems put in place to ensure that every veteran's service was accurately recorded and honored. Veteran support programs received unprecedented funding, and initiatives aimed at reintegrating former soldiers into civilian life were expanded to cover every corner of the country. Sarah became an advocate, not only for herself, but for all the forgotten heroes. She traveled across the nation, sharing her story in town halls, community centers, and on television. Her message was clear: every life, every sacrifice mattered. The movement she helped ignite inspired countless others to come forward, to demand justice for veterans whose names had been erased from history. As reforms were enacted and the investigations bore fruit, Harris and his network found themselves facing legal consequences. High-ranking officials who had once shielded the cover-up were held accountable, and the truth about the Kandahar mission was finally laid bare. The scandal shook the foundations of military bureaucracy and sent a clear message. No one, no matter how powerful, could silence the voices of those who had fought for their country. In one particularly poignant moment, Sarah sat on a park bench in her newly furnished home, her eyes tracing the sunlight that danced across the freshly planted trees. Clutching the restored Medal of Honor in her hand, a gleaming emblem of her valor, she whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. The pain of her past had not vanished completely, but it was now tempered by the knowledge that she was finally seen, finally remembered. Years later, as Sarah Langley looked back on her tumultuous journey, she understood that the fight for truth was never truly over. In every conversation, every letter from a forgotten veteran, the echo of her struggle lived on. The reforms set in motion had not only restored the dignity of countless veterans, but had also transformed public policy to ensure that history could never again be so easily rewritten. At annual commemorative events, Sarah would stand before crowds of fellow veterans and citizens, her voice steady and sure as she recounted her story. "We are not invisible," she would say. "Our sacrifices, our blood, our tears, they are woven into the fabric of this nation, and though there may be those who try to erase us, we will always rise again." Her journey became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even when the darkest forces conspire to silence the truth, a single voice can spark a revolution. The story of Sarah Langley, the veteran whose name was once erased from history, transformed into a rallying cry for justice and remembrance. It served as a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring obligation of a nation to honor those who have served. In the end, as the sun set on a nation forever changed by the revelations of that turbulent period, Sarah's restored record and renewed honor stood as living proof that every sacrifice mattered. The wounds of betrayal, though deep, began to heal in the warm light of accountability. And in every veteran's story shared thereafter, the promise that no one will be forgotten resonated. A promise forged in the crucible of war and sealed by the courage of a warrior who refused to let her past be erased. Sarah Langley's journey, from the brutal battlefields of the Middle East to the cold, indifferent halls of bureaucratic neglect, and finally to the triumphant reclamation of her identity, reminds us that the true measure of a nation lies not in its monuments or its power, but in how it honors those who have paid the ultimate price for its freedom. Her story is one of unyielding courage, an indictment of a system that once chose to forget, and a call to action for every citizen to stand up for the forgotten. Every page of her life, every tear shed in solitude, became a rallying cry for change, a reminder that while history can be manipulated, truth cannot be buried forever. As you reflect on Sarah's tale, ask yourself, can the erasure of a single name change the course of history? Does a nation's honor lie in the recognition of its heroes or in the silence of its apathy? In Sarah Langley's resolute quest for justice, the answer is a resounding call to remember, to fight, and to honor. For every veteran whose sacrifice has been overshadowed by politics and neglect, Sarah's story offers hope. A promise that one day every brave soul will be seen, every act of valor will be recognized, and no one will be allowed to fade into oblivion. If you believe in the power of truth, if you believe that our nation owes a debt to those who have given everything for it, then join in this fight for remembrance. Let Sarah Langley's journey inspire you to question the status quo, to demand accountability, and to ensure that the sacrifices of our heroes are never again erased from history.